Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Today we're going to talk about those whose heroism often remains in the shadow of Harry Potter. The wizarding world is truly full of heroes, and while Harry may be the face of the resistance, he was by no means the only one who showed courage and strength in the fight against darkness. There were others, those whose deeds deserved no less praise, heroes who didn't wear fame like a cloak, but kept fighting when it was terrifying, difficult, and painful. Let's remember those who deserve the title of hero just as much as the chosen one himself. Enjoy watching. Number 1, Hermione Granger. Hermione isn't just the clever one, she's a fighter. From the very beginning, she was the one who kept the trio afloat. Her knowledge, intuition, and logic saved them time and time again. Think back to how she secretly created the Society for the Protection of Magical Creatures, how she pored over spellbooks while others rested, how she searched for answers when it seemed none existed. But her most painful and heroic act? That moment with her parents. She erased herself from their memories, voluntarily, to protect them. That decision wasn't just magic, it was a sacrifice, a real one, made out of love for the sake of the world. Number 2, Remus Lupin, a man who carried a curse his entire life. Remus was someone born to be an outcast, dangerous, isolated, unwanted, and yet he never turned bitter. He became a teacher, a mentor, a friend. When he came to Hogwarts to teach Harry, he gave him more than just knowledge. He gave him a role model, a lesson in how to be kind when the world calls you a monster, how to fight for good even when you're afraid of yourself. And when the Battle of Hogwarts came, Remus didn't back down. He fought on the front lines beside his wife, and he left this world the way he lived, bravely. Number 3, Neville Longbottom. Who would have thought that the shy boy constantly losing his toad would grow into a true warrior? But he did. Neville always showed signs of the steel within. Remember when he stood up to Harry, Ron, and Hermione in their first year, because you could get us all in trouble? From there, he only grew stronger, joining Dumbledore's army, fighting in the Ministry, resisting the Carrow regime at Hogwarts when everything turned into a nightmare. And then came the moment that made him a legend. He pulled the sword of Gryffindor from the hat and destroyed one of the final Horcruxes, right in Voldemort's face. Number 4, Severus Snape. Severus Snape was never easy to admire. His words cut. His stare burned. To Harry, he was a tormentor, cold, bitter, cruel. But underneath the harshness was a man who had given up everything. He once loved Lily Evans. And when she died, Snape didn't ask for redemption, he asked for a way to protect her son. Always, he said, and that one word held a lifetime of pain and loyalty. For years he served Dumbledore in secret, spying on Voldemort, fooling Death Eaters, and risking his life every day without thanks. His final act came with blood on the floor. As Nagini struck, Snape fell, breath shallow, eyes fading. He looked at Harry, not with hatred but with sorrow. "Take them," he whispered, pressing his memories into Harry's hands. Those memories revealed everything, the truth about the Elder Wand, the plan to defeat Voldemort, and a love that never died. Snape didn't live to see the world he helped save, but when Harry named his son Albus Severus, he said it plain. He was the bravest man I ever knew. That is what Severus Snape became, not a perfect man, but a true hero. Number 5, Dobby. Dobby was born to obey. He belonged to the Malfoys, beaten and silenced, taught that freedom was not his right. But Dobby chose to disobey. He warned Harry about the Chamber of Secrets. He punished himself to protect him, and when Harry tricked Lucius into freeing him, Dobby didn't run from danger, he ran toward it. Again and again, he helped in secret. He carried messages, he watched over students. He served not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to. Dobby is free, he said, and that freedom made him brave. His final act was his greatest. When Harry, Ron, Hermione, Luna, Dean and Griphook were held prisoner in Malfoy Manor, Dobby apparated into the jaws of death. He defied Bellatrix Lestrange. He grabbed the knife and cut them loose. As they disappeared, she hurled her blade, and it struck. He died in Harry's arms, whispering, "Such a beautiful place to be with friends. Dobby is happy to be with his friend, Harry Potter." A house elf, once mocked and mistreated, gave his life for love. That was no servant's death. That was a hero's. Number 6, Minerva McGonagall. Minerva McGonagall was never one to show fear. Her voice was sharp. Her back was straight. She ruled her classroom with iron logic and unwavering fairness. But beneath that stern surface lived a lion's heart. When the Death Eaters took over Hogwarts, she didn't flinch. She stayed. She protected the students. She endured the Carrow's cruelty, waiting for her moment. And when Harry returned to the castle, she seized it. In the great hall, in full view of everyone, she drew her wand and faced Severus Snape. "It is I who should be telling you what to do," she snapped, and then attacked. Snape fled. The teachers rallied. McGonagall took command. She enchanted the suits of armour, prepared the castle's defences, and stood on the front line as the Battle of Hogwarts began. She was no longer just a teacher, she was a general. Her leadership didn't come from ambition, it came from duty. She fought not to prove herself, but because protecting her students was all she ever cared about. In the darkest hour, her courage lit the way. Number 7, Ron Weasley. Ron Weasley never asked to be the hero. He was the youngest son in a loud family, the best friend of the Chosen One, and the sidekick to the brightest witch of their age. But Ron's courage wasn't in headlines, it was in his actions. He threw himself on a giant chessboard and let the pieces smash him so Harry and Hermione could go on. He followed them into the Chamber of Secrets. He stood on the front lines at the Battle of Hogwarts. Again and again he chose danger for the sake of his friends. But his truest test came in the woods when the Horcrux locket poisoned his thoughts. It showed him every fear, his insignificance, his jealousy, his doubts. "Least loved, always second best," it hissed. For a moment Ron nearly believed it. But he didn't run. He picked up the sword of Gryffindor and destroyed the Horcrux, saving Harry and proving his heart was stronger than any curse. In that moment, Ron wasn't a sidekick. He was the hero of his own story. Number 8, Sirius Black. Sirius Black lost everything. His best friends were murdered. He was thrown into Azkaban without trial. For 12 years he lived among Dementors, trapped, haunted, forgotten. But Sirius never broke. He escaped not to seek revenge, but to protect Harry. "I would have died rather than betray my friends," he once said. And he meant it. When he found Harry, he didn't try to reclaim his old life. He became what Harry needed most, a father figure, a fierce protector, a link to the family he never knew. His most heroic act came at the Ministry of Magic. Harry had been lured there. It was a trap. Sirius knew the risk. The Order warned him. But the moment he heard Harry was in danger, he didn't hesitate. He arrived in a flash of spells, shielding Harry and dueling side by side with him. For a few moments, it was as if nothing else mattered, just Godfather and Godson, back to back, fighting for each other, until Bellatrix Lestrange struck. One curse, one heartbeat. Sirius fell through the veil, gone in an instant. He died as he lived, defiant, reckless and brave. His death shattered Harry. But even in that loss, Sirius left behind the image of a man who refused to let cruelty define him. He was hunted, hated, and locked away. And still he chose love. That choice made him more than a victim. It made him a hero. Number 9, Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore was never simple. He was brilliance wrapped in secrets. He carried regret like a shadow and power like a burden. But when the time came to choose between his life and the safety of others, He didn't hesitate. He made a pact with Severus Snape. When the moment came, Snape would kill him. "You must be the one to kill me, Severus. It is the only way," Dumbledore said. It wasn't surrender, it was sacrifice. He knew the curse from the Horcrux ring was killing him. He knew Draco Malfoy had been tasked to murder him. Dumbledore chose to die on his own terms, to protect Draco's soul, to protect Snape's cover, to protect Harry's path. That night on the Astronomy Tower, when Snape whispered Avada Kedavra and Dumbledore fell, it wasn't just the end of a man. It was the final move in a plan built on love, pain, and impossible choices. Dumbledore's heroism wasn't loud. It was layered, flawed, and human, but it held the world together. He gave Harry the tools to win, but never demanded glory. "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Those words were his gift. In the end, Dumbledore's greatest act wasn't defeating dark wizards. It was showing that the greatest magic is to care, even when it hurts. Number 10. Molly Weasley. Molly Weasley had always been the heart of the burrow. Her arms were for hugging. Her voice was for scolding and singing lullabies. She cooked, knitted, and worried. But in the Battle of Hogwarts, that soft, motherly presence transformed into something fierce. When she saw Bellatrix Lestrange aiming a deadly curse at Ginny, something inside her ignited. She stepped forward with fire in her eyes and roared, "Not my daughter, you bitch." Bellatrix laughed at first. She had killed before, she had tortured and destroyed, but she wasn't ready for the fury of a mother fighting for her child. Molly's magic didn't come from power, it came from love. Spell after spell flew through the air, and Bellatrix faltered. In one blinding flash, the most dangerous witch in Voldemort's ranks was dead, collapsed on the floor. Molly didn't pause to celebrate. She didn't raise her wand in triumph. She ran to her daughter and pulled her close. That moment echoed louder than any battle cry. A homemaker, underestimated and overlooked, had brought down a murderer with nothing but fury and devotion. Molly's heroism was never about fame. It was about family. In the end, she proved what kind of magic is strongest, not the darkest, but the deepest. And it lived in her all along. Number 11. Fleur Delacour. Fleur Delacour was dazzling. Everyone saw it. Blonde hair, graceful charm, part Veela, she seemed untouchable. During the Triwizard Tournament, many dismissed her as vain, more beauty than bravery. But Fleur proved them wrong, again and again. She swam into freezing waters to save her sister in the second task, risking her own score. And later, when war tore the world apart, she did something even braver. She stayed. When Bill Weasley was mauled by Fenrir Greyback, his face torn and forever scarred, no one expected Fleur to remain. Even Molly doubted her. "You thought I would not wish to marry him," Fleur snapped. "Because of these bites?" Her voice was fierce, her love louder than any spell. She married Bill anyway, standing by him with pride and without fear. It wasn't about appearances, it was about loyalty. She chose love over vanity, and that moment rewrote her story. Fleur opened Shell Cottage to those in need. She hid the hunted. She sheltered Harry, Ron and Hermione after their escape from Malfoy Manor. She risked everything to make her home a sanctuary, while Death Eaters hunted down anyone offering aid. She did it quietly, without praise, without hesitation. The same girl who once charmed a crowd now stood in the shadows, feeding fugitives and whispering hope into a broken world. When the final battle came, she fought with the rest of the Weasleys, not for glory, not to prove herself, but because courage had always lived in her, quiet, steady, and true. Fleur was never just a beauty. She was a warrior in silk, a shield in the storm, a flame that refused to flicker. In the darkest moments, she didn't run. She stayed. And that made her a hero. Number 12. Aberforth Dumbledore. Aberforth Dumbledore was not a man of speeches or grand gestures. Most knew him as the grumpy barman at the Hog's Head, a man with a long beard, bad temper, and an unusual fondness for goats. But when darkness swallowed Hogwarts and the ministry fell, Aberforth stepped out of the shadows. While others vanished, he opened a hidden passage behind Ariana's portrait and turned his pub into a lifeline. "I'm not my brother," he told them bluntly, but he gave them shelter all the same. It was Aberforth who fed the resistance, who sent food through the tunnel when the Carrows ruled the school. He let Dumbledore's army pass in and out, quietly keeping the rebellion alive. He gave Harry, Ron, and Hermione a place to breathe when they returned to Hogsmeade, chased by Death Eaters. No ceremony, no request for thanks, just action. When asked why he helped, he muttered, "Because he's my brother, isn't he?" But it wasn't just about Albus, it was about right and wrong. His life had been marked by pain. The death of his sister Ariana tore the Dumbledore family apart. Aberforth never forgave Albus fully, yet in the end he chose to stand by Harry, not because he trusted his brother's grand plans, but because he recognized courage when he saw it. He protected the next generation without seeking attention. That choice, made with grief still burning in his heart, required more bravery than most duels. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Aberforth fought alongside students and teachers, defending a school he had once turned his back on. He didn't need redemption, he didn't want praise, but he came anyway, with a wand in hand and quiet fury in his eyes. In a war filled with loud heroes, Aberforth's heroism whispered, and it was no less powerful. Number 13, Kreacher. Kreacher was no friend to Harry when they first met. His voice always muttered insults, his eyes narrowed with loathing. He clung to the old ways of the Black family, blood purity, hatred for Muggleborns, and absolute contempt for anyone who wasn't worthy. For years he served in silence, never forgetting that Sirius, his master, treated him with disgust. When Sirius died, Kreacher's betrayal felt personal, but even then the truth lay deeper. Everything changed when Harry chose to treat him with dignity. He gave Kreacher Regulus's locket. He spoke kindly. He offered orders with respect. And the old elf, so used to cruelty, broke. He wept. He obeyed. "Master Regulus was a good boy," Kreacher said, his voice trembling as he told the story of the cave, of the potion, of his master's death. That moment wasn't just confession, it was the rebirth of a soul. Harry gave him purpose, and Kreacher gave him the key to defeating Voldemort. Later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, the most unlikely thing happened. Kreacher reappeared, leading the charge of the house elves, wielding knives, crying out, "Fight! Fight! Fight for my master, defender of house elves!" The same Kreacher who once cursed Muggleborns now fought for their freedom. He led a rebellion from the kitchens against the very ideals he once served. No magic, no glory, just loyalty, earned the hard way. Kreacher's story proves something powerful. Redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, bitter, and slow. But when it comes, it changes everything. A servant, once poisoned by hatred, became a soldier for love. That is not only rare, it is heroic. Number 14, Regulus Arcturus Black. Regulus Arcturus Black was once proud to wear the mark of the Dark Lord, a pure blood from the House of Black. He was raised with a sense of superiority and devotion to Voldemort's cause. But that loyalty shattered the moment he learned what the Dark Lord was truly doing, splitting his soul into pieces to gain immortality. Regulus, barely more than a boy, saw the horror of it all and made a choice that no one expected. In silence, and with no hope for recognition, he turned against Voldemort. He discovered the secret of the Horcrux hidden in the cave. Using the help of Kreacher, his family's house elf, Regulus planned to steal the locket Horcrux and replace it with a fake. He ordered Kreacher to return and tell the story. "Do as I say," he told the elf, knowing it would be his end. He drank the poison in the basin himself, fell into the dark waters, and was dragged under by the Inferi. No glory, no farewell. Just one brave act that would only come to light years later. Harry found the fake Horcrux in the locket and read the note inside. "I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I face death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B." The initials meant nothing at first, but eventually the truth surfaced. It was Regulus who gave them their first step toward Voldemort's downfall. Without him, they might never have succeeded. What makes Regulus a hero is not just the act of stealing the Horcrux, it's the fact that he did it alone, with no fanfare, and knowing that he would die for it. He was just a boy, a Slytherin, a Death Eater, a younger brother who saw more clearly than the world gave him credit for. And in the end, it was his quiet rebellion that changed the war. His name was almost forgotten, but his courage was carved into the victory that came after. Number 15, Ginny Weasley. Ginny Weasley's name is often spoken with a passing nod, as though her role in the story were secondary, just Ron's younger sister, or the girl who eventually married Harry Potter. But that perception belies a truth far more profound. Ginny's journey is one of quiet, ferocious courage, marked by a steady evolution from a shy first-year girl to a fierce defender of Hogwarts. From the moment she set foot in the castle, the shadow of the Chamber of Secrets loomed over her childhood. Possessed by the darkest magic, she was manipulated by Tom Riddle's diary, a vessel of Lord Voldemort himself. The fact that Ginny survived this ordeal as an 11-year-old, deeply traumatized and racked with guilt, and still emerged determined to grow stronger, speaks volumes. She did not let the horror of her first year define her. Instead, she chose to rise above it. The diary incident could have broken her. Most students, subjected to such a violation of their mind and body, might have retreated inwards, but not Ginny. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore explains that her soul had been nearly destroyed by the diary's influence. And yet, by the next year, Ginny stood tall, learning to control her magic with even more confidence. Her brothers noted that she had grown into a formidable witch, and her willingness to speak her mind became more pronounced. She did not cower under the weight of her past. She trained harder, laughed louder, and lived with a passion that burned quietly but steadily. The trauma didn't harden her, it refined her. Resolve. As she grew older, Ginny proved herself time and again, not through boasting or dramatic speeches, but through actions. When Dumbledore's army was formed in Order of the Phoenix, she joined without hesitation. At a time when most students were too afraid to challenge Umbridge's tyranny, Ginny became one of the fiercest members of the Resistance. She trained in secret, practicing defensive spells, learning the Patronus charm, and showing particular talent with the Bat-Bogey hex. In fact, her hex was so powerful and effective that even Slytherins came to fear her. The fearlessness with which she stood against the oppression of the Ministry's influence in Hogwarts was not something she inherited, it was something she chose. Her participation in the Department of Mysteries battle was not a reckless decision, but a clear sign of her willingness to fight for what mattered. Alongside Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Luna, she faced Death Eaters inside the Ministry of Magic. The battle was fierce, chaotic, and lethal. Ginny was injured, her ankle broken during the skirmish, but she continued to cast spells and support her friends. She didn't beg to be left behind. She didn't panic. She endured. It's important to remember that the opponents they faced were fully grown wizards trained in the dark arts. Yet Ginny, still only 15, held her ground with unwavering determination. During Harry's 6th year, Ginny's presence becomes more prominent, not because she's suddenly relevant to the plot as Harry's romantic interest, but because she's become one of the most respected students in school. Her skills on the Quidditch field, her wit, and her confidence make her stand out. Even Hermione acknowledges Ginny's strength, noting that she's tough, she's funny, and she's brilliant at Quidditch. But these traits go beyond teenage charm. They're the outward expressions of inner strength. Ginny had taken everything that had once made her vulnerable, the possession, the fear, the silence, and turned it into power. She became someone even Fred and George looked up to. The true test of her character, however, came in her final year, when Hogwarts was seized by the Death Eaters. With Snape as headmaster and the Carrows inflicting punishments that bordered on torture, many students fell into fear and passivity. Ginny did not. Alongside Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood, she took leadership of the remnants of Dumbledore's army. Together they fought to maintain hope within the walls of the school. They defied the regime with sabotage, hidden messages, and underground meetings. Ginny was not simply surviving, she was resisting. The cost of defiance was high. Students were beaten, cursed, and sometimes disappeared altogether. But Ginny kept fighting. What makes her resistance even more powerful is that it was done without the safety net of adult supervision. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were on the run, and the Order of the Phoenix was scattered. Ginny could have left. She could have waited for someone else to save the school, but she understood, more than most, that evil doesn't retreat unless it is confronted. She organized students, encouraged them, protected them. When Luna was kidnapped, when others were hurt, Ginny was there. Not loud, not showy, just resolute. Neville later tells Harry that Ginny helped keep the DA alive, and that's no small feat in the face of systemic cruelty. When the Battle of Hogwarts finally began, Ginny refused to stay behind. Though she was initially told she was too young to fight, she snuck back into the castle. This act alone is a reflection of who she had become, someone who could not tolerate standing on the sidelines while others fought for freedom. During the chaos of the battle, she fought alongside seasoned witches and wizards, defending the very place where she had once been so vulnerable. She faced danger head-on, not because she sought glory, but because it was right. There was no audience, no applause, just the simple choice to be brave. One of the most moving examples of Ginny's heroism came not from a single spell or moment of physical strength, but from her emotional resilience. After Fred's death, the Weasley family was shattered, and yet Ginny still found the strength to stand beside her family in mourning, offering comfort and solidarity in their darkest hour. Grief is often a test of courage, and Ginny bore it silently with dignity. In the face of pain, she did not crumble. She supported others even as her own heart was breaking. Number 16, Alastor Mad-Eye Moody. Mad-Eye Moody was not the kind of man who smiled often, nor was he the type to seek applause. He was scarred, weathered by decades of war, and famously paranoid to the point of obsession. Yet no one who truly understood the war against Voldemort ever laughed at his constant vigilance. In fact, it was this very paranoia, this relentless attention to danger, that had kept him alive through battles which claimed the best and the brightest. While most of the wizarding world tried to forget the first rise of the Dark Lord, Mad-Eye remembered every casualty, every betrayal, every name etched into his memory like a wound that refused to heal. His life was not defined by comfort or companionship, but by sacrifice, tireless service, and a steadfast refusal to yield in the face of darkness. He had fought long before Harry Potter ever opened his first book at Hogwarts. Alastor Moody, the most respected Auror of his time, had personally filled half the cells in Azkaban during Voldemort's initial reign. He had hunted Death Eaters without rest, often at the cost of his own well-being. He bore the physical scars proudly, his magical eye replacing the one he had lost in combat, the wooden leg clunking against the floors as a reminder that safety was always an illusion. He was not just a warrior, he was a living warning. As Dumbledore once said, Mad-Eye's reputation is well deserved. The fearsome man who appeared to live on edge was not deluded. He was the one person who understood exactly what was at stake. And yet, Despite his legendary status, the real Moody barely graced the pages of Harry's life. For an entire year at Hogwarts, the person everyone believed was Alastor Moody was, in truth, Barty Crouch Jr. using Polyjuice Potion. It is perhaps one of the cruelest ironies in the story that Moody's most vivid presence in the series was a lie. But what made the real Moody remarkable was not the spectacle of his lessons or the drama of the Triwizard Tournament. It was the quiet courage he demonstrated behind the scenes, away from the spotlight, where real heroes often work. He didn't hesitate when asked to join the revived Order of the Phoenix. While others weighed the risks, Mad-Eye simply showed up. He knew exactly what Voldemort's return meant, and he didn't need convincing. His experience was invaluable, and Dumbledore trusted him with some of the Order's most delicate missions. During the relocation of Harry from Privet Drive in the summer before his 5th year, Moody was tasked with ensuring security so tight that even the Ministry couldn't interfere. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered through gritted teeth as he cast disillusionment charms on himself and hovered nearby, his eye darting in every direction at once. That magical eye, capable of seeing through walls and invisibility cloaks, was never still, and neither was Moody. When Harry was transported from number 4 Privet Drive to Grimmauld Place, it was Moody who coordinated the operation. The risks were enormous, but he accepted them without protest. He understood that leadership in wartime meant accepting death as a possibility, not a surprise. More importantly, he trained the younger Order members in how to fight, how to anticipate danger, how to survive. He instilled in them not only spells and curses, but the mindset required to confront evil. Nymphadora Tonks, Kingsley Shacklebolt, even Arthur Weasley, all of them respected him not just for his skills, but for his unwavering sense of responsibility. Years of chasing dark wizards had turned him into a man who rarely trusted anyone fully. But when he did, it meant something. He placed that rare trust in Dumbledore and, by extension, in Harry. Though he may not have shared many personal moments with the boy, he saw him for what he truly was, not just the symbol of resistance, but a child who had been thrust into an unwinnable war. Moody never coddled him, never offered warm words, but he protected him with a ferocity few others matched. He didn't need sentiment to risk his life for others. Duty was enough. The night of the 7 Potters was the final testament to that duty. Knowing full well that Voldemort now had access to Harry's movements and that his followers were desperate to capture the boy, Moody devised an elaborate decoy plan involving 6 Polyjuice Potters, each escorted by a protector. The real Harry, he determined, would fly with Hagrid on Sirius Black's old motorbike. It was a calculated risk, one he thought the Death Eaters would least expect. But Mad-Eye, ever aware of how fragile plans could be in the chaos of battle, took the most dangerous route for himself. Though he flew alongside Mundungus Fletcher, the least trustworthy of the group. Moody must have known, must have suspected that the man might panic, and indeed he did. When ambushed mid-air by Voldemort himself, Mundungus disapparated, leaving Moody exposed. It was in that brief, brutal moment, high above the countryside, that Alastor Moody met his end. No witness saw his final moments, no wand was raised in mourning, no final spell sealed his fate. Just the sudden absence of his magical eye, the silence that follows a hero's fall, and the grim confirmation of his death by the Order. His body was never recovered. His death went largely uncelebrated in the public eye, eclipsed by the rising terror that followed. But within the Order there was no doubt about what he had done. He had once again placed himself between evil and innocence. He had died the way he had lived, facing the enemy head-on without illusion or cowardice, and though he did not live to see Voldemort's fall, his contribution was etched into the very foundation of that victory. Number 17, Luna Lovegood. They called her Loony Lovegood behind her back, sometimes even to her face. With her radish earrings, her dreamy gaze, and her unwavering belief in creatures no one else had seen, Luna Lovegood was an easy target for ridicule. But when the world crumbled under the weight of darkness, it wasn't the loudest or the strongest who held the line, it was the one who saw beyond. Luna's eccentricities weren't weakness, they were clarity. When others panicked, she remained calm. When others questioned, she believed. And when others gave up, she held on. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was right. In the shadowed halls of Hogwarts, as the Carrows turned learning into torture and silence became survival, Luna never lost herself. She painted murals of her friends on her bedroom ceiling, surrounded their names with golden chains of friendship, and believed fiercely in kindness in a time that rewarded cruelty. She was not loud in rebellion, but her resistance was unwavering. Ginny Weasley and Neville Longbottom knew this well. Together they kept the spirit of Dumbledore's army alive in those suffocating months. When others shrank in fear, Luna stood quietly but firmly. "Things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end," she once said. It wasn't naivety, it was hope, weaponized against despair. At the Ministry of Magic, when she followed Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville and Ginny into the Department of Mysteries, she wasn't a trained duelist, she wasn't the chosen one. But she fought with calm precision, she cast spells to protect others, to hold off Death Eaters, to buy time. And when the battle turned vicious and terrifying, when Hermione was cursed, when Ron was knocked out, when the very walls seemed to bleed chaos, Luna did not run. She stood with them. She made her choice to believe that even a sixth year with wide eyes and a dreamy voice could be part of something bigger. She gave Ron an encouraging smile, the book says, in a moment when most were too afraid to speak. Captured and held in the Malfoy Manor, Luna endured imprisonment with a grace few could replicate. She was locked away, kept in the dark, treated like a bargaining chip. And still she offered comfort to Mr. Ollivander, the broken wand-maker, sharing whispers of courage and consolation in the silence of that cold cellar. Harry, upon seeing her again, noticed how calm she was, how unfazed. She welcomed him with genuine warmth, despite the terror of the place. In the bleakest of moments, Luna's presence became a light. She reminded others of who they were. She reminded Harry of who he was. It is easy to think of heroism as something loud, wands flashing, voices shouting, battles won. But Luna's bravery never came with noise. It came with stillness. It came when she stopped Harry in Ravenclaw Tower, guiding him not just physically but emotionally, helping him see the diadem for what it truly was, not merely a relic, but a piece of Rowena Ravenclaw's spirit. She spoke to the Grey Lady with a gentleness no one else could muster. In that moment, she didn't just help Harry find a Horcrux, she helped him understand loss, regret, and the need for empathy. Luna never demanded attention, yet she was often the emotional compass for those around her. When Dobby died in Harry's arms, it was Luna who gently closed his eyes and said, "Now he could be sleeping. No theatrics. Just truth and grace." In that quiet act, she honored the fallen elf with more dignity than many heroes have ever shown. It was Luna who reminded them all that even in war, compassion mattered, that death wasn't just an end, but something sacred. Her role in the Battle of Hogwarts was not merely symbolic. Luna fought. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the best of them, spells flying, walls trembling, the sky torn apart by fire and screams. She called out to Harry when he faltered, urging him with a voice filled not with panic, but with urgency and purpose. And when the battle was done, and the dead lay still, she didn't celebrate. She simply existed in the silence, carrying her grief with the same poise she carried her wand. What made Luna a true hero wasn't just that she fought the enemy. It was that she never became like them. In a world where darkness tempted even the best to compromise, Luna stayed pure. She didn't hate. She didn't judge. she didn't waver. Her belief in the unseen extended not just to magical creatures but to people. She saw worth in those society dismissed. She believed in Neville before he believed in himself. She treated Kreacher with respect. She loved without condition. Even after the war, when the dust settled and names were carved in stone, Luna remained herself. She pursued the things she loved, studied the creatures she believed in, and stayed connected to her friends not out of obligation, but out of deep affection. She was one of the few who never tried to reshape herself to fit the mold of what a hero was supposed to be. Luna redefined it. She showed that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums softly in the background, steady and unwavering. Number 18, Arthur Weasley. Arthur Weasley never sought the spotlight, nor did he carry himself like a man of legend. There were no golden plaques in the Ministry of Magic bearing his name, no tales sung about him in the Great Hall. Yet in the shadows of greater names, Albus Dumbledore, Harry Potter, Sirius Black, there stood this quiet man with thinning red hair, second-hand robes, and a fascination with Muggle batteries. Arthur was to most merely a mid-level ministry worker in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. But beneath his humble exterior pulsed a spirit of quiet rebellion, one rooted not in grand speeches or flamboyant spells, but in persistent honesty and quiet resistance in a world darkened by fear and conformity. Arthur chose the path of light in an era when even ministry officials whispered in corridors and avoided eye contact when the word Voldemort was spoken. He joined the Order of the Phoenix, not for glory or out of obligation, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. While others looked away, Arthur stood his ground. He did not allow fear to cloud his judgment. He was not a duelist by reputation, nor a strategic genius, but he lent his strength, his home, and his heart to the cause. Grimmauld Place saw his presence often, not with the swagger of the brave, but with the resolve of the good. Perhaps the most tangible evidence of Arthur's courage lies in the Department of Mysteries. On a cold night in December, he was tasked with guarding the entrance to the Hall of Prophecy. There, inside the bowels of the ministry, as dark forces sought forbidden knowledge, Arthur stood watch. He was not a warrior, but he fought. When Nagini, Voldemort's serpent, struck him under the Dark Lord's control, Arthur suffered near-fatal wounds. The book recounts, there was a great slash across his chest and his face was slick with blood. He very nearly died, and yet he never complained, never retreated from the fight. Even in recovery, he remained steadfast, more concerned for his family than his own pain. That night in the Department of Mysteries was no isolated moment. Arthur's heroism wasn't shaped by one act of valor, but by the life he lived every day. In a ministry that bent its knee to Cornelius Fudge's delusions and later to Pius Thickness's control under the Imperious Curse, Arthur maintained his moral compass. While others doctored reports and pushed propaganda, Arthur quietly pushed back. He stood firm in his position despite the derision of co-workers and the ridicule of those who mocked his interests in Muggle affairs. He never allowed the system's rot to taint his soul. In fact, he tried, however subtly, to cleanse it. He taught his children to believe in justice, loyalty, and kindness, not by sermon, but by example. Bill became a curse-breaker for Gringotts and a fighter in the Order. Charlie trained dragons in Romania, working with dangerous creatures and living a life of fearless passion. Percy lost his way, swept up by ambition, but it was Arthur's forgiveness, not punishment, that brought him back. Fred and George, twin whirlwinds of mischief, used their talents to mock the oppressive regime of Dolores Umbridge and later became key figures in the resistance. Ron, the most insecure of them all, stood beside Harry through every battle, every trial. Ginny, fierce and defiant, dueled Death Eaters and helped lead the DA at Hogwarts. All of them were raised under Arthur's roof, within a house that lacked gold, but overflowed with strength. Even the burrow itself became a symbol of quiet resistance. While the Malfoys dined under chandeliers and whispered treason behind silk curtains, Arthur's home stood open to fugitives, friends, and anyone in need. Harry was taken in not as a guest but as a son. The fireplace became a secret corridor, the kitchen a war room. Though the Weasleys had little, they gave freely. That generosity, that choice to offer warmth in a world gone cold, was itself an act of rebellion. Arthur never abandoned his belief in the goodness of others, even as darkness crept into every corner of Wizarding Britain. He supported Hermione's campaign for house elf rights, not because he sought political gain, but because it was the right thing to do. He visited St. Mungo's after his attack and spoke kindly to the staff and fellow patients, showing none of the bitterness that might have poisoned a lesser man. He greeted Remus Lupin with respect, never flinching at his condition as a werewolf. He treated Muggleborns with dignity and admiration, never reducing them to statistics or problems. He believed in the value of all people, magical or not. It is easy to mistake humility for weakness. In the Second Wizarding War, Arthur was passed over for high positions, likely due to his unwavering values. He refused to support oppressive policies, and that made him a threat in a ministry hungry for control. But Arthur remained at his post, quietly moving information to the Order, watching, listening, resisting. He may not have had the power to change the system from within, but he never allowed it to change him. That in itself takes strength most cannot fathom. Fred Weasley's death during the Battle of Hogwarts shattered the family, but Arthur, broken with grief, never let despair consume him. In the chaos of war's end, he stood firm, a rock for his surviving children, for Molly, for George. In the ruins of the Great Hall, he carried not just sorrow, but hope. That hope had carried him through both wars, from the days when Voldemort first rose to the night of his final defeat. Arthur's pain was private, but his resilience was visible. He remained standing, aged, hurt, yet unbroken. Few remember that Arthur also played a key role in aiding Harry before the Triwizard Tournament. He personally accompanied Harry and the Weasleys to the Quidditch World Cup and was quick to react when Death Eaters attacked. In a world still recovering from Voldemort's first fall, Arthur never let his guard down. He shielded his children while preparing them for the truth that darkness often comes not with banners and fangs, but in policies, propaganda, and fear. When Dolores Umbridge spread paranoia and intolerance through Hogwarts, Arthur didn't hide. He remained a quiet adversary. Though he lacked the political clout to oppose her directly, he never discouraged his children from resisting. He supported the DA, he trusted Harry, and he never, not once, let ministry pressure change his values. His strength lay not in wand work, but in conviction. That perhaps is rarer still. Arthur's fascination with Muggle objects was never merely comedic relief. It symbolized his open-mindedness, his hunger for connection in a world built on division. While others saw Muggles as beneath them, Arthur saw wonder. He asked, "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" Not out of ignorance, but from genuine curiosity. He honored differences. He saw bridges where others saw barriers. That view shaped the family that would help save the wizarding world. His injuries from the attack at the Department of Mysteries left scars, but they never dimmed his spirit. When Dumbledore was killed and Voldemort rose openly, Arthur stood ready again. He helped move Harry to the Burrow before the wedding. He helped coordinate safe houses. He kept fighting long after many had fallen. His name wasn't on the Prophet's front page, but his presence was in every victory. He held the line so that others could push forward. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Arthur fought alongside his children and wife. No longer the mild-mannered bureaucrat with a fondness for plugs, he became a soldier. As curses flew and walls collapsed, he held his wand steady. He duelled with courage. His son died that night, and yet Arthur did not waver. His grief was real, but so was his determination to finish the fight. The Ministry had fallen, Hogwarts was in ruins, but Arthur Weasley remained, alive, still standing, still good. In the end, Arthur Weasley is a reminder that heroism doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes with integrity, with kindness, with the ability to raise a family of fighters without ever raising your voice. Sometimes it looks like second-hand robes, a patched-up home, and a heart full of stubborn love. Arthur never needed to prove himself with spells or speeches. He proved himself every day, in the choices he made, the truths he upheld, and the light he passed on to those who followed. Number 19. Narcissa Malfoy. In the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, as spells flew and screams echoed through the ruins of a once majestic school, one figure moved quietly through the shadows, her heart pounding with fear, not for her own life, but for the life of her son. Narcissa Malfoy, known to most as the elegant wife of Lucius and the proud mother of Draco, was not a warrior, not a rebel, not a part of the Order of the Phoenix. Yet, in that single moment in the Forbidden Forest, she did something that not even the most seasoned Aurors dared. She lied to Lord Voldemort, and that lie became the turning point of the entire war. Narcissa's presence at that fateful scene was not born of loyalty to the Dark Lord. Her husband, Lucius Malfoy, once a proud Death Eater, had grown weary and broken after years of serving a madman. Their family, once untouchable and revered in the wizarding world, had become a tool, discarded and punished whenever they failed to meet Voldemort's impossible standards. By the final year of the war, the Malfoys were no longer devoted followers but prisoners of circumstance. Their only concern was survival, and for Narcissa, that meant protecting Draco. It was not bravery in battle or defiance on the battlefield that made Narcissa a hero. It was a whisper, a glance, a question asked in secret, surrounded by Death Eaters and enemies. When Voldemort ordered her to confirm whether Harry Potter was dead, she knelt beside the boy who had become the symbol of resistance. His eyes were closed, his body was motionless, but when she leaned in, her voice shaking, she asked a question that no one else could hear. "Is Draco alive?" The answer, soft and immediate, changed everything. Harry whispered, "Yes." Her son was alive. Narcissa stood up, looked into the face of evil itself, and said what Voldemort needed to hear. "He is dead." In that moment she did not care about prophecies, wands, Horcruxes, or chosen ones. She cared only for Draco. If Harry was alive, the battle would continue. But if Voldemort believed him dead, Harry would be carried into the castle under a lie. It was a risk, a gamble, but it was all she had. And in that quiet defiance, she chose love over fear. It is a profound irony that the most honest act in the final hour of war came in the form of a lie. A lie told by a mother who had spent most of the series in the background, her loyalty never fully questioned, her courage never truly tested. Until then. Narcissa's deception was not one of malice or ambition. It was born of desperation and devotion, a sacrifice that no one had asked her to make, but one she made nonetheless. In doing so, she placed herself in grave danger. Voldemort was not known for mercy or understanding. A single slip of the tongue, a flicker of suspicion, and she could have been killed where she stood. This act of maternal courage stands out because it was not expected. Narcissa had never aligned herself with Dumbledore's cause. She had never fought in open rebellion. But like Severus Snape, another character cloaked in shadows and secrets, she made a choice when it mattered most. And unlike many others, her choice was not motivated by politics, ideology, or prophecy. It was deeply personal. She risked everything to secure a future for her child. In a world filled with grand speeches and heroics, Narcissa's act was quiet, but it shook the foundation of the Dark Lord's victory. What makes her moment even more significant is that it provided Harry with the one thing he needed most: a second chance. If Voldemort had known Harry lived, he would have killed him instantly. But because of Narcissa, Harry returned to the castle under the guise of death, and the final confrontation could unfold on his terms. In that pause, in that silent deceit, the tide turned. Voldemort had declared victory too early, and his forces celebrated prematurely. That single heartbeat of false hope allowed the defenders of Hogwarts to regroup, to rally, and to fight back one last time. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, J.K., Rowling describes this moment with chilling clarity. Narcissa Malfoy, however, moved as though she could hardly stand, and stepped awkwardly toward the figure on the ground. She was not fearless, she was not strong in the physical sense, but courage, as Dumbledore once said, comes in many forms. Narcissa's strength was not the kind celebrated in songs or remembered in statues. It was the strength to lie to a tyrant for the sake of her son. This quiet heroism redefines what it means to be brave. Narcissa did not need a wand duel to show her allegiance. She did not need to declare herself against Voldemort in public. In fact, her survival, and that of her family, depended on her ability to remain silent, to blend in, to deceive. But when the moment arrived, she chose humanity over horror. She chose her son over her master. And in doing so, she became one of the few characters who stood face to face with Voldemort and walked away stronger. Her love for Draco had always been fierce, but it had never before been tested in such extreme circumstances. From the beginning, Narcissa had done everything in her power to keep her family intact. When Draco was tasked with killing Dumbledore, she begged Severus Snape to protect him, risking Voldemort's wrath by acting outside the bounds of loyalty. That act alone, the unbreakable vow, showed her willingness to defy the most dangerous wizard of all time. But even then, she had not acted alone. In the Forbidden Forest, she stood utterly alone. The Malfoy family's eventual departure from the battlefield is often overlooked, but it too is an act of quiet resistance. They did not stay to defend Voldemort. They did not continue fighting once their son had been found. They slipped away arm in arm through the ruins of a collapsing empire. They were no longer Death Eaters. They were no longer part of the war. They had lost their place in the old world, but gained a place in a new one, a place where love, not bloodline, defined courage. It is tempting to view the Malfoys as villains turned victims, and in many ways they were both. But Narcissa's moment of rebellion shows that people are not bound to the sides they once chose. Redemption can come in many forms, and sometimes it arrives not with applause or forgiveness, but with a silent lie whispered into the ear of a dying boy. Narcissa Malfoy reminds us that heroism is not exclusive to the virtuous or the brave. It can belong to the desperate, to the afraid, to those who have everything to lose. She was never part of Harry's journey. She never stood by him. Yet when it mattered most, she ensured he would live. She may never have received a medal or even thanks, but her choice rewrote the ending of the story. Her lie was not just an act of rebellion, it was an act of faith. Faith that if Harry lived, there was still hope for the world her son would grow up in. Faith that the war could end and something better could be built in its place. In her eyes, the victory was not for Hogwarts or the Order, but for Draco, for the child she had carried, nurtured, and feared for every day of his life. There are many heroes in the Harry Potter series. Some wore robes and fought with wands, others gave speeches or led armies. But Narcissa's heroism came in a moment of stillness, in the breath between life and death, when the fate of everything depended on a single lie. She gave Harry a chance, she gave her son a future, and she gave the wizarding world its final, most unexpected heroine. Number 20. Sybill Trelawney. Professor Sybill Trelawney was never meant to be the obvious hero. In a castle filled with wand-wielding legends, skilled duelists, and brave-hearted warriors, she floated through the halls like a faded spectre from another world, shrouded in shawls, murmuring ominous omens, and clutching her ever-present sherry glass. Students laughed at her. Even the staff often dismissed her eccentric mutterings as the ramblings of a self-absorbed fraud. But behind the haze of incense and the clink of crystal balls, Sybill Trelawney carried within her a truth so powerful it changed the fate of the entire wizarding world. Her greatest act of heroism came not from dueling or confrontation, but from unknowingly speaking the one prophecy that sealed the link between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort. She became, against all odds and expectations, the unlikely oracle who shaped destiny. The significance of Trelawney's prophecy was not immediately apparent. When she delivered it during her interview with Albus Dumbledore at the Hog's Head Inn, she did not do so consciously. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches," she intoned in a voice not her own, "born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies." At that moment, she was overtaken by genuine prophetic vision, one of only 2 real predictions she ever made in her life. What she could not have known was that Severus Snape, acting as Voldemort's spy, was listening at the door. Though he only heard part of it, that fragment was enough to launch the Dark Lord into action, setting him on the path to destroy the infant Harry Potter and inadvertently sealing his own doom. Dumbledore understood the weight of that moment. He protected Sybill Trelawney from then on, hiring her not because of her teaching prowess, which was minimal, but because she was now a living vessel of a critical magical truth. Trelawney herself had no memory of the prophecy she had delivered. Her mind, delicate and often unstable, could not hold such power consciously. Still, she walked the halls of Hogwarts as a fragile guardian of destiny, her role cloaked in layers of ridicule and theatricality. Few knew what she had done, fewer still respected her for it. Her second true prophecy came years later during a divination lesson with Harry. Once again, she was overtaken by an inner force and predicted the return of the Dark Lord. "It will happen tonight. The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless. His servant has been chained these 12 years. That servant was Peter Pettigrew, who would indeed rejoin Voldemort and help him rise again. This moment was brushed off by Harry as another strange episode, and Trelawney quickly resumed her usual melodrama. But the words were true, and Dumbledore took note. Again, her unconscious visions became crucial puzzle pieces in the coming war. Despite this, Trelawney continued to be a figure of mockery. Dolores Umbridge, in her tyrannical attempt to purge Hogwarts of what she called inefficiency and disorder, dismissed her from her teaching duties. Sibyl's heartbreak was visible. She wept as she was expelled from her tower, humiliated in front of her students and peers. But Dumbledore stood up for her, refusing to let her be thrown out of the castle altogether. Her presence, though misunderstood, was still necessary. She remained a shadow on the margins, an exile in her own home, but she never left. When war finally came to Hogwarts in full force, Trelawney could have fled. Many did. Teachers and students alike scattered in fear or joined the resistance from safer positions. Yet she stayed. She stood her ground during the Battle of Hogwarts, not as a warrior or strategist, but as a defender of her school. The very walls that had housed her dreams and delusions now became the front lines, and she did not retreat. In that most critical hour, Sybill Trelawney found courage not through magic wands or incantations, but through instinct and desperation. It was during that chaos that she became something else entirely. According to eyewitnesses like Lavender Brown and Padma Patel, Trelawney did not cower behind her tower walls. Instead, she took up her crystal balls and used them as weapons, hurling them at attacking Death Eaters with unexpected accuracy. She threw crystal balls at Death Eaters' heads, rolling notes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. They smashed like bombs. There was no poetry in her resistance, no divine trance guiding her arm, just raw defiance. It was a moment of action, driven by conviction, by a refusal to let evil take what had once been her sanctuary. The woman who had spent years speaking in riddles and shrouded warnings had found clarity. The eccentricities that once defined her became tools of war. Her strange affinity for crystal orbs, her hoarding of mystical paraphernalia, these became weapons, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of resistance. She, who had once been deemed ornamental, irrelevant, even delusional, had taken up arms in the only way she knew how. She was not a duelist, but she was not a coward either. Her defense of the school was not just physical. In standing her ground, she also vindicated herself spiritually. For too long, her gifts had been doubted, laughed at, and dismissed. Yet the great irony of Trelawney's life was that her most important contributions were the ones she didn't even remember making. Her heroism was quiet, uncelebrated, and often invisible. But it was real, and in the hours when the fate of the magical world trembled on a knife's edge, she rose, not as a prophet, but as a protector. There's something profoundly tragic about Trelawney's story. Even in the aftermath of the battle, she remained largely unacknowledged. There were no songs sung in her name, no commemorations of her role. History moved on, and Sybill Trelawney returned to her tower. But something had changed. She had been tested, and in her own peculiar way she had passed. Her classroom, still thick with incense and shadowed by the clink of teacups, was no longer just the domain of predictions and illusions. It was the domain of a survivor, a silent hero. Those who dismiss her still fail to see the full picture. She may have stumbled through her lessons, invented portents, and wept over broken omens, but Sybill Trelawney was the first to foresee the storm, and among the last to flee from it. Her life is a reminder that even those deemed weak or deluded can hold the keys to destiny. That true strength can be found in the least expected places. That prophecy and purpose often wear strange disguises. So, when we speak of heroes, let us not forget the woman in the tower whose voice echoed with doom and promise. Let us remember the trembling hands that threw crystal balls like grenades, the half-remembered voice that shaped a boy's fate, and the unwavering spirit that refused to break, even when the world laughed at her. Professor Sybill Trelawney was many things: mystic, eccentric, outcast. But in the hour of need she was something else entirely. She was brave. Number 21, Andromeda Tonks. She was born into one of the most powerful, most feared wizarding families of the age. The House of Black, a name that inspired awe and demanded obedience. The family tree boasted names like Sirius Black, whose rebellion echoed through the halls of Grimmauld Place, and Bellatrix Lestrange, whose madness left trails of destruction in her wake. Yet among these proud and cruel figures stood a woman whose courage was not forged in battle, but in love, endurance, and silence. Andromeda Tonks, née Black, made a choice that cost her everything and gained her a legacy of quiet heroism that few in the wizarding world even paused to admire. But her story deserves to be told, not for its grandeur, but for its depth. She was the middle sister, the one caught between two extremes. On one side, Bellatrix, consumed by bloodlust and dark arts, utterly devoted to Voldemort. On the other, Narcissa, elegant and manipulative, a mother willing to bend the world's rules if it meant protecting her son. But Andromeda walked a different path. When she chose to love a Muggle-born Ted Tonks, she was not just choosing a partner, she was choosing a life of exile. Her name was burned off the Black family tapestry, as if her very existence had to be erased. She wasn't just disowned, she was shunned, forgotten, condemned. Sirius once said, "My mother blasted him off after he ran away," just like she did to Andromeda. The erasure was the same, but Andromeda had not run. She had stood still and refused to bow. In a world that revered blood purity above all else, her defiance was monumental. It wasn't a rash teenage rebellion. Andromeda was well-educated, well-groomed, and well aware of the consequences of her actions. But she chose Ted Tonks anyway. She married him, bore his child, and lived among Muggle-borns and half-bloods as an equal. She could have had a life of luxury, prestige, and power. Instead, she chose love, simplicity, and truth. In doing so, she dismantled centuries of indoctrination, not with a wand, but with a choice. Her life was not marked by glory. She did not fight on the front lines like her daughter, Nymphadora, or stand defiant in Hogwarts like Neville Longbottom. Her battlefields were kitchens and nurseries, conversations and holidays, the small and constant resistance of building a life away from the darkness she had known. She raised her daughter with values opposite to those of her upbringing. Nymphadora Tonks, Aura, Order of the Phoenix member, warrior, was the living proof of Andromeda's quiet resistance. In Tonks's bravery, awkward charm, and boundless heart, we see the legacy of a mother who taught her that blood does not define worth. The war returned to her doorstep more brutally than anyone could have imagined. When Voldemort rose again, Andromeda watched as her daughter stood against the darkness her own sisters now served. Bellatrix, the killer of Sirius, the madwoman who laughed at death, fought for the man who had once seduced the pure-blood elite with dreams of domination. Andromeda's family was at war with itself. She must have known that the price would be unimaginable, but she did not falter. She let her daughter go to battle, understanding the cause was greater than fear. Then came the final blow, the kind of devastation that reshapes a soul. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Nymphadora and Remus Lupin died side by side. Heroes, yes, but also husband and wife, mother and father. When the dust settled and the victory was proclaimed, Andromeda was left with a grandson, an orphaned boy, barely a day old, named after his father. Teddy Lupin, a child born into light, wrapped in the shadow of loss. Andromeda, now widowed, for Ted had been murdered earlier in the war, took the child in her arms and chose again. She chose not to crumble. It would have been understandable had she broken. She had lost her husband, her only child, and her place in the world. She had already lost her sisters to madness and manipulation. The family that once surrounded her was either dead or monstrous. She had every reason to retreat, to let grief consume her. But she didn't. She raised Teddy, alone, in silence, with strength. She did not seek attention, did not beg for pity, did not demand recognition. The books do not give us much of her, only fleeting mentions. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Harry finds out Tonks and Lupin have died, it's barely a paragraph. The grief of the nation focuses on the fallen warriors, as it should. But somewhere in that celebration of victory, a grandmother wrapped a blanket tighter around her grandson and whispered stories of the parents he would never know. That was her battle. That was her triumph. The burden she bore was not just emotional. She had to live with the memory of who her sisters had become. Imagine raising a child while knowing that one of the most feared Death Eaters in history was once the sister who used to braid your hair. Imagine carrying that knowledge and choosing every day not to let hatred define your heart. Andromeda could have poisoned Teddy with bitterness. Instead, she gave him a legacy of love. In the few glimpses we have of Teddy Lupin in the post-war world, he is described as cheerful, loved, mischievous, the very things war often steals from children. Andromeda gave them back. Her strength lies not in what she destroyed, but in what she preserved. She preserved compassion in a world devastated by cruelty. She preserved sanity in a family known for its madness. She preserved hope when the night was darkest. And in doing so, she became something far more rare than a warrior. She became a healer, a foundation, a safe haven. It is easy to glorify dramatic sacrifices, the ones that happen with wands drawn and curses flying, but the hardest battles are the quiet ones, the ones no one sees. Andromeda lost everything, yet she got up each morning and loved a child who reminded her daily of all she had lost. That is heroism of the highest order. She did not need a wand to be powerful. She did not need applause to be brave. She stood as a mirror to her sisters, and in that reflection we see the power of choice. Bellatrix chose fanaticism. Narcissa chose loyalty to her son above all, but Andromeda chose integrity. She chose to believe that love, real, unconditional love, was worth exile, war, and loss. That belief shaped everything that came after. J.K. Rowling does not linger on her, but she does not need to. In just a few lines, she draws a character of immense depth. The way others speak of her, or fail to, tells us enough. Andromeda's silence is her monument. Her absence from the battlefield makes her presence in the aftermath all the more powerful. There is a quiet nobility in choosing peace when the world chooses violence. There is unmatched courage in facing a future alone and still daring to love. Andromeda Tonks was not a warrior in the traditional sense, but she is one of the bravest characters the wizarding world has ever known. Her legacy is not marked by victories or spells. It is marked by survival, by empathy, by choosing what is right over what is easy. In the end, Teddy Lupin grew up not just as the son of heroes, but as the grandson of a woman who refused to surrender to grief. His godfather, Harry Potter, watched over him from afar. But it was Andromeda who fed him, bathed him, told him bedtime stories. It was she who gave him roots, and in doing so, she gave the wizarding world one more miracle, a child raised by love, not war. No statue will be built in her honor. Her name will not be taught in defense against the dark arts. But her story lingers, stitched into the fabric of everything good that survived the war. She is the quiet proof that heroism is not loud and greatness is not always recognized. But it is there, in the choices made when no one is watching. Andromeda Tonks chose the light when it cost her everything, and in doing so, she gave the world something precious. Hope that even the deepest legacies of darkness can be undone, not by force, but by love. Number 22, Garrick Ollivander. It was in the dusty silence of Ollivander's wand shop that Harry Potter first met the man who would later emerge as one of the quiet heroes of the wizarding world. Garrick Ollivander, with his silvery eyes and ethereal presence, seemed almost like a relic from a more ancient time, someone more in tune with the rhythm of wands than with the chatter of men. He was revered as the finest wand-maker in Britain, perhaps in the world, a man whose understanding of wand lore bordered on the mystical. Yet few could have predicted that this reserved craftsman, hidden away in his shadowy Diagon Alley shop, would one day be dragged to the very center of the battle between good and evil, and would endure horrors that would break most men. When Voldemort returned to full power, the Death Eaters began consolidating every source of magical knowledge that might give their master an advantage. Garrick Ollivander, with his encyclopedic understanding of wand allegiance and magical cause, was one of the first to be targeted. He was abducted in the dead of night, his shop left abandoned and empty, the glass windows shattered, and the shelves stripped bare. His kidnapping went almost unnoticed in the chaos of Voldemort's rising regime, but its consequences were monumental. For Voldemort knew the prophecy, and he knew the wand of Harry Potter had bested his own. The Dark Lord wanted answers only Ollivander could provide. Imprisoned in the dark and damp basement of Malfoy Manor, Ollivander was subjected to months of relentless interrogation. The Death Eaters demanded knowledge of wand lore, and Voldemort himself wanted to understand why his wand had failed against Harry's. Ollivander, frail in body but steel in spirit, suffered quietly. He was starved, bruised, and broken, but he never gave them everything they wanted. He guarded the deeper truths of wand loyalty and core resonance as if they were his own children. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, with all her cruelty, could not pry the heart of wand lore from him. The book tells us, He looked thin and gaunt, as though he had shrunk within his own skin, and his silvery eyes were dimmed with pain. Despite this harrowing condition, he did not descend into madness. Instead, he waited, patiently, enduring every moment not for his own sake, but for the greater good. It was Luna Lovegood who was imprisoned alongside him for a time, and though they barely spoke, her presence reminded him of why he could not break. The world outside still fought, children still resisted, hope had not yet died. When Harry, Ron and Hermione finally rescued him during their daring escape from Malfoy Manor, they found a man who had been starved of light but not of dignity. Ollivander, even in his frailty, offered Harry the wisdom Voldemort had tried so desperately to extract. He explained the mystery of wand allegiance, the rare phenomenon where a wand chooses a new master when bested in battle. It was Ollivander who helped Harry piece together the truth behind the twin cores, how his wand and Voldemort's shared a phoenix feather from the same bird, and how this connection created a bond that Voldemort could never understand. "He took my wand," Harry told him. "He took it. I had no chance to fight back." Ollivander's response was slow but profound. "Yes, it is a remarkable thing, the effect that twin cores can produce, particularly when in opposition one to the other." With this, Ollivander gave Harry more than an explanation. He gave him clarity. In a war defined by shadows and shifting allegiances, understanding one's tools was as vital as understanding one's enemy. Harry now knew Voldemort's obsession with the Elder Wand was rooted in his inability to grasp the limits of wand power, and this knowledge, planted by Ollivander, bloomed into the strategy that would lead to Voldemort's undoing. Ollivander did not fight on battlefields or duel beneath castle towers. His resistance was quieter, more internal, but no less heroic. His refusal to cooperate with Voldemort was an act of profound defiance. Many would have succumbed to fear or madness under such conditions, but Ollivander clung to his identity as a maker of wands, not a destroyer of truth. He understood that knowledge was power, and power in the wrong hands was catastrophe. By denying Voldemort the answers he sought, Ollivander weakened him in ways that could not be measured by spells or hexes. In many ways, Ollivander represented a different kind of strength than the one embodied by warriors like McGonagall or Lupin. His was the strength of the mind, of endurance, of silent suffering. When he finally returned to his shop after the war, the man who had once seemed a mysterious recluse was now seen as a survivor. Children who came to choose their wands would no longer meet just a wand-maker, but a man who had endured darkness and returned bearing light. Even Voldemort, who prided himself on understanding power, failed to comprehend that some truths cannot be forced out with cruelty. Ollivander, with his thin frame and haunted eyes, taught us that the battle for freedom was fought not just with spells, but with memory, with silence, and with integrity. Though he feared Voldemort, as any rational man would, he never let that fear become submission. He chose pain over betrayal, confusion over false clarity, and in doing so became a cornerstone in the final resistance. During Harry's final journey, the insights from Ollivander guided his steps. Without the Wandmaker's explanations, the trio would never have understood why the Elder Wand mattered, or how wand ownership could shift with disarming rather than death. The complexity of wand allegiance became one of the final keys to Voldemort's defeat. And this knowledge did not come from a prophecy, or a spellbook, or even Dumbledore's wisdom. It came from a tortured old man lying on a cot in Shell Cottage, struggling to speak, but determined to give the truth. There is quiet heroism in those who survive. Ollivander could have died in that cellar, and few would have ever known the depth of his sacrifice. But by surviving, by enduring, he became a living testament to the fact that resistance does not always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it is the refusal to teach, the refusal to cooperate, even when your body is failing. His gift to Harry was not just knowledge, it was time. He bought the world time by stalling Voldemort's understanding of wand law. Though the books rarely linger on him after his rescue, his role cannot be overstated. The wand-maker who once spoke of holly and phoenix feather with poetic detachment became the man who saved the world with a whisper. His suffering was never public, never adorned with medals or ceremonies, but for those who knew the truth, Ollivander became a symbol of endurance. He showed that knowledge, when wielded with integrity, could be sharper than any blade. It is telling that even Voldemort, obsessed as he was with domination, needed Ollivander. The Dark Lord, despite his vast power, could not master the intricacies of wand law. And it was precisely because Ollivander refused to grant him that understanding that Voldemort made his greatest mistake, believing the Elder Wand would obey him. In the end, Voldemort's defeat hinged on a truth he never fully grasped, because Ollivander never let him. Long after the war, students would whisper about the man behind the counter in the crooked little shop. Children would marvel at the precision with which he measured arms and fingers, never guessing the pain those hands had endured. For Ollivander never told them. He didn't need to. His heroism was etched into the wood of every wand he crafted, into the silence between his careful words, and into the very air of the shop that had once stood empty. Wand law, in the end, is not just about magic. It is about loyalty, connection, and choice. And Garrick Ollivander, the man who never raised his wand in battle, taught us that the strongest magic is the one that resists evil, not with fury, but with unbreakable resolve. Number 23, Cho Chang. Cho Chang is often dismissed as a footnote in Harry Potter's story, remembered primarily as his fleeting love interest or the girl who cried too much. But beneath the surface of romantic missteps and teary-eyed scenes lies a young woman who endured unimaginable grief and chose, despite it all, to stand up and fight. Her heroism wasn't the kind that made headlines at the Daily Prophet, nor did it command attention like Harry's duels with Voldemort or Hermione's brilliant schemes, but it was real, raw, and necessary, the quiet courage of someone who refused to let heartbreak silence her voice or paralyze her convictions. When Cedric Diggory was murdered in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, Cho's world shattered. She had loved him. Not in a childish, flippant way, but deeply. He was kind, brave, everything a Hogwarts girl could hope for. He had been the pride of Hufflepuff, and, more importantly, he had been someone who treated her with gentleness. To lose him in such a cruel, senseless way, killed not in battle, but as an afterthought in Voldemort's resurrection, was a trauma few could fully comprehend. Yet even as Hogwarts whispered behind cupped hands about her tears and her mourning, Cho did not allow grief to consume her identity. By her 6th year, Cho had made a choice. She joined Dumbledore's army, a secret group of students organized to resist the growing darkness and to learn the defensive magic Umbridge refused to teach. This was no easy decision. Cho had every reason to withdraw to protect herself from further pain. Instead, she stepped directly into the line of danger. She entered the room of requirement week after week, practicing spells alongside Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Luna. She stood shoulder to shoulder with students who, like her, had lost something precious to the war that was no longer avoidable. Joining the DA was her quiet declaration she would not be a victim of fear. It would have been easy for her to turn away. Her friends whispered caution. Her parents likely feared for her safety. The ministry called Dumbledore a liar, labelled Harry as delusional. Standing with them was controversial, even dangerous. But Cho, mourning and vulnerable, believed the truth mattered more. Cedric was murdered. He was murdered by Lord Voldemort, she insisted, even when people tried to tell her otherwise. That stubborn belief in the truth, despite public denial and ridicule, was itself a form of resistance. Her willingness to return to Hogwarts during the final battle should never be forgotten. By that point, the school had become a war zone. The Carrows ruled with cruelty. Students were tortured for the smallest infractions. The DA had gone underground, and Neville Longbottom bore scars, physical and emotional, for trying to keep it alive. Yet when the call came, when the word spread that Harry had returned and the fight was here, Cho came back. She didn't hesitate, she offered to fight. She entered the castle, knowing full well that she might not walk out again. Even her request to rejoin the DA during that final night was filled with conviction. She stood up in front of everyone in the room of requirement and offered her help. "If you need someone to show you the Ravenclaw common room," she began, it wasn't just about logistics. She was offering herself, her wand, her courage, her loyalty. Ginny declined her offer, not out of malice, but because she saw the tension it stirred in Harry. But that does not erase the fact that Cho had shown up, ready to risk everything. Her heroism is not flashy, and it is not flawless. Cho made mistakes. She trusted Marietta Edgecombe, who betrayed the DA to Umbridge. That betrayal caused friction, not only with Harry, but with the entire group. It would have been easy to label Cho as weak or disloyal, but that would ignore the nuance of her position. Marietta was her friend, someone she had known for years. Cho's loyalty to Marietta was not treachery, it was human. She believed in giving her friend the benefit of the doubt, and in the end it cost her. That too is part of courage, the willingness to trust, even when the world punishes you for it. Cho's grief never vanished. It was etched into her, a constant ache beneath her calm exterior, but grief did not stop her from acting. That's the essence of her bravery. She cast defensive spells with a trembling hand. She chose hope while still nursing heartbreak. She bore the whispers, the sideways glances, the half-heard jokes about how much she cried. And yet she remained. She showed up, again and again, when it would have been so much easier to disappear. The books do not linger long on her presence during the Battle of Hogwarts, but we know she was there. Fighting, surrounded by chaos, death, and destruction, she held the line. The same girl who once sobbed in the owlery was now throwing curses to defend her school, her friends, her beliefs, not because she had to, because she chose to. That choice, born out of heartbreak and loss, is the truest form of heroism. There's a beauty in the way Cho Chang embodies a quieter kind of strength. She is not immune to emotion. She weeps, she struggles, she falters, and yet she returns to the fight. While characters like Hermione inspire with intellect and Harry with destiny, Cho reminds us that heroism often lies in vulnerability, in continuing on even when you're bruised inside. She did not let Cedric's death harden her heart or twist her into a bitter shadow. She channeled her sorrow into resistance, into spells learned by candlelight in a hidden room, into standing firm when it would be easier to sit down. Even her interactions with Harry reveal this hidden courage. When they kissed, it was not a perfect fairy tale moment. She was crying, he was confused. Their romance stumbled not because Cho was weak, but because grief is messy and healing is slow. She wanted to remember Cedric. Harry, understandably, didn't want to compete with a ghost. The pain they both carried made the connection impossible. But that attempt to find comfort in each other amidst loss is another mark of Cho's humanity. She dared to reach for something good in the aftermath of something terrible. In the aftermath of the war, it's easy to forget students like Cho. The spotlight follows the victors, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville. But the freedom they secured was built on the backs of many who stood in shadow. Cho Chang's journey from mourning girlfriend to returning warrior is a story of resilience, of a young woman who refused to let grief define her, who stood for truth in a world of lies, and who walked back into battle, heart still cracked, but wand at the ready. Some heroes wave flags and ride into battle with glory. Others light a candle in the dark and wait for morning, refusing to let the night swallow them whole. Cho Chang was the latter. She reminded us that even those who cry can still cast a Patronus, that mourning and bravery are not mutually exclusive, that the quiet ones, the grieving ones, can be just as brave as the loud, maybe braver still. And perhaps that's why her story matters, not because she was perfect, or fearless, or the most powerful witch in her year, but because she was human, real. Her pain did not make her fragile, it made her fight harder. She stood on the edge of the storm and chose to walk into it anyway. With trembling hands, tear-streaked cheeks, and unwavering belief, Cho Chang became a hero, not with headlines but with heart. Number 24, Colin Creevey. Colin Creevey was never the boy anyone expected to become a hero. With a camera slung around his neck and a starry-eyed obsession with Harry Potter, he was often dismissed as comic relief in the larger narrative of Hogwarts. Students rolled their eyes when he appeared, peppering Harry with questions, begging for photographs, and beaming with relentless enthusiasm. But the truth was far more layered. Beneath that excitable surface lived a heart that beat with unshakable loyalty, quiet courage. Colin Creevey may not have been the most powerful wizard in Hogwarts, but he was one of the bravest. When Colin first arrived at Hogwarts, he was sorted into Gryffindor, and few questioned why. His small stature and wide grin didn't immediately suggest bravery, yet the sorting hat saw what others overlooked. He was a Muggle-born, someone who had no idea magic existed until a letter arrived on his doorstep. And yet he dived headfirst into this new world, never hesitating, never retreating. His fascination with Harry wasn't just hero worship, it was wonder. To Colin, Harry embodied everything magical and good, everything he wanted to protect. And that admiration soon transformed into something more profound. Colin joined Dumbledore's army not to be near Harry, but to stand for something. When Umbridge took over Hogwarts and fear began to suffocate its corridors, many students stayed silent. Colin did not. Alongside his brother Dennis, he practiced defensive spells, learned to conjure a Patronus, and swore to himself that he would not be a bystander. The room of requirement became a sanctuary, and Colin was often there, wand raised, determination sharpening his once naive eyes. He wasn't just training, he was preparing. There is something unbearably tragic about Colin's age. He was just 16 during the Battle of Hogwarts. He had been evacuated from the castle before the fighting began, too young by law to stay. And yet, when others ran for safety, Colin ran toward danger. He snuck back into the castle under the cover of night. Nobody ordered him to do it, nobody expected it, but he came back because hiding, while others risked their lives, wasn't an option he could live with. He didn't do it to prove a point or to be seen. He did it because it was the right thing. We know he died before the battle was over. In the aftermath, his lifeless body was discovered by Neville Longbottom and Oliver Wood. They carried him together into the Great Hall, laying him gently among the fallen. Colin was small, almost weightless in their arms. The image burned itself into memory. A boy who should have been in his bed, sleeping through the terror of war, instead lying dead among warriors. His camera was nowhere to be found. Maybe it was destroyed. Maybe it was still clenched in his hand when he fell. Either way, his final moments weren't behind a lens. They were face to face with the enemy. His death is never dramatized in the book. J.K. Rowling writes with painful simplicity. Colin Creevey, though underage, had sneaked back into the castle and had died in the battle. His body was curled upon the floor, and Harry covered his face with a cloak as he passed. No grand farewell, no spotlight, just a body, a loss, a child who chose to fight. And perhaps that is the most heartbreaking aspect of his heroism, how quiet it was, how easily overlooked. Colin never cast a killing curse. He didn't lead a rebellion or destroy a Horcrux. He never made a stirring speech or appeared in prophecy, but he stood beside those who did. He lent his strength to them even when his own was limited. His bravery was the type that didn't announce itself. It simply showed up when it mattered. It's easy to forget the names of the fallen when they're not part of the central plot, but the war was built on their courage, the victory was paid for with their lives. Colin Creevey reminds us that heroism isn't measured by magical talent or the size of one's wand. It's measured by conviction, by the willingness to act when fear tells you to stand down. Colin could have stayed home. He could have waited for the war to end and claimed no blame. But something in him, some fiery piece of his Gryffindor heart, refused. He wasn't a soldier by trade or nature. He was a boy with a camera, a boy who saw beauty in the world even when it trembled. In many ways, Colin represents the unnamed courage of so many who fought. Not everyone was a chosen one. Not everyone had destiny breathing down their necks. Most of them were ordinary, with ordinary fears and dreams. Yet they showed up. They took wands in trembling hands and ran toward chaos, knowing it might be the last thing they ever did. Colin did not hesitate. His choice, however brief its impact might seem, rippled through the castle. Because bravery, like fear, is contagious. The haunting reality of war is that not all stories have time to unfold. Colin's was cut short before he could grow into the man he might have been. He never graduated. He never became the celebrated photographer he probably dreamed of becoming. His life was a snapshot, frozen in a moment of youthful defiance, but that snapshot is worth remembering, because in that frame lives the essence of what Hogwarts fought for, the right of every child, no matter their background, to learn magic in peace. The irony is painful. Colin, who loved to capture moments, became a moment himself. A symbol, not one of glory, but of quiet sacrifice. He will never be commemorated in statues or celebrated in wizarding history books, but his story lives in the shadows of the Great Hall, in the hush that follows the roll call of the fallen. He died defending a world he barely had time to understand, but he believed in it, and that belief was enough to carry him into the fire. When we think of the Battle of Hogwarts, we often picture giants clashing, spells exploding, and heroes rising. But there were also boys like Colin, small, overlooked, but burning with resolve. His legacy isn't one of power, it's one of purity. He didn't fight because he was expected to. He fought because he couldn't stand by, and that makes him braver than most. Even in earlier years, when others mocked his obsession with Harry, Colin's persistence showed something rare. He didn't care about appearances, he cared about truth. And the truth was, he believed in good, he believed in friendship, he believed that Harry's story mattered, and by extension so did everyone else's, who stood for the same values. That kind of faith isn't blind, it's chosen, and it doesn't die with the body. Dennis Creevey, his younger brother, survived the war. And though we are never told how Dennis processed the loss, we can imagine the weight of it. How do you make sense of a sibling's death in a battle he was never meant to fight? But perhaps in some quiet way, Dennis understood, because Colin didn't die as a casualty. He died fulfilling a promise to himself, to his friends, and to a cause worth every risk. In the years after the war, Colin's name might fade from memory. His pictures may be tucked away in forgotten drawers, but somewhere in the foundation of Hogwarts, in the stones that bore witness to the night it almost fell, Colin's courage is carved in silence. He was not a famous wizard, he was not a chosen one, but he was brave. And in that bravery, he stood taller than most. Number 25. Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley Shacklebolt moved through the world of magic like a quiet storm, calm, composed, but powerful enough to shift the tides of history. In a wizarding world fragmented by fear and suspicion, Kingsley stood as a symbol of unwavering integrity. While others in the Ministry of Magic were turning blind eyes or succumbing to political pressure, Kingsley operated with a rare blend of discretion and daring, carefully weaving himself into the fabric of resistance. His work as an aura was just the surface of his legacy. Beneath the official title was a man deeply involved in the Order of the Phoenix, risking not only his life but also his career to uphold what he knew was right, even when the world tilted toward darkness. One of the most striking moments of Kingsley's bravery unfolded during the high-risk mission known as the Operation Seven Potters. When Harry Potter's safety became paramount following the exposure of 4 Privet Drive, the Order organized an intricate escape plan involving 6 polyjuiced decoys. Kingsley volunteered to escort one of these fake Harrys, fully aware that Death Eaters would attack with deadly force. The skies that night were filled with chaos, curses flying, brooms spinning, and Death Eaters chasing their targets like vultures. Kingsley's partner, Hermione, flew beside him in disguise, and it was under Kingsley's calm yet fierce protection that she survived. His dueling skills were exceptional, dispatching enemies with grace and without panic. The book recounts a jet of green light shot past Harry's left ear. Kingsley Shacklebolt spun in mid-air and fired a spell back that hit his pursuer squarely in the chest, Deathly Hallows. His instincts, reflexes, and composure made him not just a fighter but a protector, even in the face of death. Long before that fateful night, Kingsley had already proven his worth by infiltrating the very heart of the corrupted system. While working at the Ministry, he subtly sabotaged the Death Eaters' influence and fed information to the Order. When the Ministry was pursuing Sirius Black, Kingsley cleverly led the Muggle Prime Minister's security detail, pretending to search for Black while deliberately misdirecting his colleagues. The duality of his role required a precise moral compass. He never let the cover distract him from his mission, resisting Voldemort's rise by using the very institution that Voldemort hoped to control. His presence at the Ministry became a quiet rebellion in itself, a spark of light within the growing shadow. Kingsley's contribution wasn't solely limited to physical heroism or undercover resistance. He also played a vital role in preserving morale. When Dumbledore's death sent tremors of despair through the wizarding world, it was Kingsley's voice that called for unity, action, and wisdom. His words, though few, carried weight. In the darkest times, he became a source of calm authority, treating others with respect regardless of blood status, rank, or fear. Even within the Order, which was filled with strong personalities, from Moody's paranoia to Sirius's recklessness, Kingsley was listened to. His presence reassured others, and that in itself is a form of heroism often overlooked. In the battle for Hogwarts, Kingsley did not retreat into leadership or strategy alone. He fought on the front lines. The final battle was not a place for speeches or titles, and Kingsley knew it. He duelled alongside McGonagall and Horace Slughorn against the most fearsome of enemies, Lord Voldemort himself. That moment, described in the book, stands as a testament to Kingsley's courage. Voldemort was duelling McGonagall, Slughorn, and Kingsley all at once, and the 3 of them were giving him everything they had. Deathly Hallows. To face the Dark Lord directly required more than want skills. It demanded a soul that could not be broken by fear. Kingsley had such a soul, and he proved it with every spell. But perhaps Kingsley's most profound act of heroism occurred after Voldemort fell. In the rubble of Hogwarts, when many sought vengeance or chaos, Kingsley rose to a different kind of power, one far more difficult to command. He was appointed interim minister for magic, not because he craved authority, but because no one else inspired the same trust. The wizarding world was bleeding, its institutions shattered, and its people disillusioned. Kingsley became the steady hand, guiding a broken society toward healing. He removed the corrupt officials, ended discriminatory policies, and reopened channels between magical beings that had been long silenced. Unlike so many before him, Kingsley wielded power not to dominate, but to restore balance. Reforming the Ministry was not a glamorous task. It involved careful investigation, subtle diplomacy, and a willingness to make unpopular decisions. Kingsley tackled systemic prejudice head-on, removing Dolores Umbridge and other supporters of Voldemort's regime from positions of influence. His tenure was marked by transparency and outreach, house elf rights, goblin autonomy, and fairer trials for accused witches and wizards. These were issues Kingsley took seriously. He understood that the only way to prevent another Voldemort was to remove the injustices that made people vulnerable to hate in the first place. What sets Kingsley apart from other figures in the war is his quiet consistency. He never wavered. While others questioned Dumbledore's judgment or doubted Harry's claims about Voldemort's return, Kingsley stood firm. He trusted truth even when it was unpopular. He trusted Harry even when the prophets smeared his name, and he trusted the idea that change could come not from rage but from reason. It's no coincidence that Harry himself respected Kingsley deeply. Their bond wasn't born out of personal affection, but mutual respect forged in fire. Even in his small gestures, Kingsley revealed greatness. When guarding the Muggle Prime Minister, he maintained not just security but dignity, treating the man with respect, unlike many wizards who dismissed Muggles as inferior. That sense of fairness, that all lives, magical or not, had value, informed all of Kingsley's decisions. In many ways, he was the true counterpoint to Voldemort. Where the Dark Lord sought domination through fear, Kingsley pursued peace through courage. It's important to note that Kingsley never saw himself as the hero. He acted not for recognition, but because the alternative, inaction, was unacceptable. He did what needed to be done, regardless of the cost. When asked to take on a new assignment, to fly into danger, to step into leadership, he did so without fanfare. This humility only deepened the respect others held for him. True leaders rarely seek power. Kingsley embodied this truth every step of the way. His legacy is woven not only into battles and reforms, but into the lives he protected. Every student at Hogwarts who walked the halls free from the Carrow's cruelty. Every ministry employee who no longer feared being sacked for blood status. Every family that found justice after years of silence. All of them owe something to Kingsley. His strength was never loud, but it was always present. And in a world that had forgotten what real leadership looked like, Kingsley reminded them. The contrast between Kingsley and others in power, such as Cornelius Fudge or Pius Thicknesser, could not be sharper. Where they faltered in the face of crisis, Kingsley remained a rock. Fudge denied Voldemort's return out of fear. Thickness served as a puppet, but Kingsley resisted, not just with wand and spell, but with unshakable values. That resistance, steady, patient, and wise, was what made him a hero in ways no battlefield alone could define. Even among the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley was unique. Moody was fierce, Lupin compassionate, Tonks daring. But Kingsley was balanced. He had enough of all their strengths without their weaknesses. He wasn't paranoid like Moody, emotionally worn like Lupin, or impulsive like Tonks. That balance allowed him to lead when the time came, and it's why the wizarding world could rebuild under his care. He gave people hope not through promises, but by being the kind of man they could believe in. Kingsley Shacklebolt story is not told with the same spotlight as others, but his impact is undeniable. The wizarding world did not need another savior. It needed someone strong enough to rebuild what was broken, and that's exactly what Kingsley did with wand in hand, wisdom in heart, and a vision for a future where magic and justice walked side by side. Number 26, Lily Potter. In the darkened nursery of Godric's Hollow, Lily Potter stood between her infant son and death itself. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the instinctive refusal to allow evil to triumph. She had no wand in hand, no protective spell at her lips, and yet she became the final line of defense between Lord Voldemort and the child he had marked for death. In that singular moment, Lily wasn't just a mother. She became a symbol of something far older and more powerful than any curse, self-sacrificing love. Her act, unarmed and deliberate, echoed through time, unraveling the darkest sorcery and marking her as one of the greatest unsung heroes of the wizarding world. Lily could have stepped aside. Voldemort gave her the chance. According to Severus Snape, The Dark Lord had told her to stand aside not once, but twice. "Stand aside, you silly girl, stand aside now," he had said, not out of mercy but out of strategy. Voldemort didn't wish to waste magic on unnecessary targets. But Lily made a conscious choice. She did not run, she did not beg for her life, and she did not allow evil to dictate her fate. She chose instead to die in her child's place, an action that Voldemort neither understood nor respected, an oversight that would ultimately lead to his downfall. What Lily unleashed in that moment was not found in any textbook at Hogwarts. It was a deeper, ancient form of magic, one not taught by Professor Flitwick or recorded in the annals of Dumbledore's vast library. Dumbledore himself later explained it to Harry in these words: "To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever." Lily's choice activated a magical shield around her son, not made of spellwork, but of sacrificial love. The curse rebounded. Voldemort was destroyed, and Harry survived the killing curse, a feat no one else had ever accomplished. The echo of that night lived on in Harry's scar, a symbol not just of survival, but of his mother's heroism. Her sacrifice wasn't a momentary display of bravery. It was the reason the boy lived, the reason Voldemort's first reign ended, and the reason hope was rekindled in the wizarding world. Yet Lily's name was rarely spoken with the reverence reserved for the Order of Merlin recipients or the legends of old. Her heroism was quiet, maternal, instinctive, but it reshaped the fabric of destiny. Lily was more than a martyr. Her life before death paints the portrait of someone uniquely equipped to defy darkness. Born Lily Evans to a Muggle family, she was the first witch in her bloodline. But from the moment she stepped onto Platform 934, it became clear she wasn't just another gifted student. She possessed a rare combination of emotional intelligence, moral clarity, and unshakable loyalty. Her friendship with Severus Snape, despite his growing obsession with the dark arts, reflected her unwillingness to abandon people, even when their paths turned dark. She believed in redemption, in goodness, and in the capacity of others to change. Her eventual falling out with Snape wasn't due to a lack of compassion, but because of her refusal to compromise her values. When Snape called her a mudblood, it wasn't merely an insult, it was a betrayal of everything Lily stood for. She understood the weight of those words and knew that standing beside someone who used them was an act of cowardice. This clarity, this refusal to tolerate darkness cloaked in excuses, was part of the same moral compass that led her to stand her ground in Godric's Hollow. Lily's choices reverberated far beyond her own family. Her death haunted Severus Snape until his last breath. The man who once stood beside Voldemort turned spy for Dumbledore, not for politics or ideology, but because of Lily. Every risk Snape took, every lie he told, every bitter moment he endured was fueled by guilt and love. He told Dumbledore, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment. Don't tell me now that you've grown to care for the boy." And when Dumbledore asked, "After all this time?" Snape answered, "Always." It was Lily's sacrifice, her integrity, her love that inspired even a Death Eater to change sides. Even the magical protection that saved Harry was only possible because of Lily's specific actions. She had a choice to step aside or to die. It was this deliberate sacrifice, as Dumbledore emphasized, that triggered the ancient spellwork. She gave him a lingering protection he never knew, a protection that flowed in his veins to this day. That protection saved Harry not just from Voldemort's curse, but from the very hands of Quirrell years later. When Quirrell tried to touch Harry, he was burned because of Lily. "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love," Dumbledore explained. Her courage, then, was not in throwing a punch or casting a spell. It was in choosing to die when she could have lived. It was in saying no to evil, not in battle, but in sacrifice. This brand of heroism is rarely sung about in ballads. It doesn't come with medals or ministry honours. It is soft and fierce and final. And yet it is the kind of heroism that truly changes the world. When we think of the people who stood against Voldemort, we think of the Aurors, the Order of the Phoenix, the Dumbledore's army. But it all began with a mother in a nursery refusing to let darkness win. Lily's bravery also exposed Voldemort's greatest weakness. The Dark Lord, for all his knowledge and power, could not grasp love. He could not see how a mother's act of self-sacrifice could possess more force than any unforgivable curse. His soul, so broken and fragmented, was incapable of understanding the strength in selfless emotion. This blind spot was not just a misjudgment, it was his fatal flaw. He overlooked Lily's sacrifice, dismissed it, and in doing so, cursed himself to a fate he couldn't escape. The magical residue of Lily's love was so strong that it clung to Harry for years, even when he didn't know it. She protected him. She put herself between him and the curse, said Dumbledore. And when Harry reached the end of his own journey and chose to sacrifice himself for his friends, the echo of Lily's love surged forward again. Her legacy wasn't only in her son's survival, it was in the moral framework she left behind. In dying for love, she taught Harry how to live with purpose. Lily's courage wasn't born in a moment of panic. It was consistent, lived in, and proven over time. Even before the war, she was known for standing up to cruelty. At Hogwarts, she called out James Potter for bullying others. She refused to let popularity or pressure sway her principles. Her strength was moral before it was magical. She wasn't just protecting Harry from Voldemort, she was protecting him from a world that could become indifferent to cruelty. Her heroism remains strikingly modern in its quiet defiance. It didn't require glory, it didn't need witnesses. She didn't expect to be remembered as a legend, nor did she act out of vengeance or pride. Her final act was pure, a clean choice in the face of filth. In that she became a mirror to all other characters in the series. Some chose self-preservation, others sought power. Lily chose love, and that made all the difference. The ripples of her sacrifice even touched those she never met. When Narcissa Malfoy lied to Voldemort about Harry being dead, it wasn't just for Draco. Somewhere deep down, she too was responding to the unspoken truth that love protects. When Harry told his son, "You were named after 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew," he was remembering Snape. But it all circled back to Lily, because Snape's bravery was a monument to her. Even in the final book, when Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest to face death, he is walking the same path his mother walked. He too chooses to die to protect others. And when he uses the resurrection stone, Lily appears beside him. She doesn't weep. She doesn't scream. She simply says, "You've been so brave." Those words seal her legacy, not just as a mother, not just as a victim, but as the origin of everything that mattered in the fight against darkness. In the end, Lily Potter did not raise her wand to defeat Voldemort. She raised her heart, and that was enough. Number 27, Fred Weasley. Fred Weasley never planned to be remembered as a hero. To most, he was the twin who laughed the loudest, who filled the quiet spaces of Hogwarts with pranks and explosions of colour. He was the boy who turned rules into punchlines and authority into a stage for rebellion. But when the time came to choose between comfort and courage, Fred didn't hesitate. Beneath the humour and chaos lived a heart that beat for justice, loyalty, and freedom. When the stakes became deadly serious, Fred met the storm with a grin and stood tall as one of the most fearless fighters of the Resistance. His journey into heroism was not defined by a single moment, but 1,000 small choices that built toward the final stand. At Hogwarts, when Dolores Umbridge turned the school into a place of surveillance, punishment, and fear, Fred and George became symbols of rebellion. While others whispered complaints in the shadows, the twins turned the corridors into battlefields. "Give her hell from us, Peeves," Fred called out as they left the castle on broomsticks, leaving a trail of fireworks and chaos behind them. In that act, they did what few dared. They mocked the system so openly and spectacularly that even Umbridge's cruelty looked foolish. It was more than mischief. It was resistance through joy. In the darkest moments, Fred used laughter as a weapon, daring the darkness to try and silence it. The courage it took to defy Umbridge publicly cannot be overstated. She held unchecked power, backed by the Ministry of Magic, and ruled with an iron fist disguised in pink cardigans. Students were tortured with blood quills, and fear settled like a permanent fog over Hogwarts. In such an atmosphere, it was not easy to laugh, much less fight. Yet Fred transformed laughter into defiance. When most teenagers feared losing house points, Fred and George risked expulsion, and worse. Their departure from school wasn't an escape. It was a statement. They left behind not just classrooms, but a legacy of standing up when it mattered. Fred's heroism didn't stop at Hogwarts gates. When the Order of the Phoenix needed help to extract Harry from Four Privet Drive, Fred volunteered without hesitation. It was one of the most dangerous missions the Order attempted. With Death Eaters lying in wait, the skies turned into a deadly chase. Fred became one of the 7 decoys, risking his life to protect the real Harry. During that ambush, his twin George was gravely injured, losing an ear to a curse. Fred, normally the louder of the two, was subdued but never weakened. He stayed by George's side, joking through the pain to keep his brother's spirit intact. "You look like a lopsided pirate," he said, hiding his fear behind wit. That moment revealed the steel beneath the surface, a brother who never allowed despair to win, even when tragedy knocked on their doorstep. Throughout the escalating war, Fred stayed active in the resistance. He and George opened Weasley's Wizard Wheezes not only as a business but as a stronghold of light and rebellion. Their inventions became tools for the Order, extendable ears for gathering intelligence, shield hats to deflect curses, skiving snack boxes to help students escape torture under Umbridge. They weren't just selling jokes, they were supplying hope. Fred turned comedy into strategy, showing that even in war, levity could serve a purpose. His brilliance lay not only in making people laugh, but in teaching them to resist with courage and cunning. As the war deepened and Voldemort's shadow fell over every corner of the wizarding world, Fred remained committed. When the radio program Potterwatch emerged as a lifeline for the resistance, Fred contributed under the pseudonym Rapier, offering updates, coded encouragements, and, most importantly, hope. He refused to let fear silence him. In a time when speaking the truth could lead to death, Fred chose to speak louder. His voice joined others in defiance, becoming a part of a network that kept the spirit of the resistance alive. This wasn't the work of a prankster anymore. It was the work of a man who understood what was at stake and acted without hesitation. When the final battle came, Fred stood on the front lines. The Battle of Hogwarts was not just a clash of spells. It was the final stand for love against hatred, for freedom against tyranny. Fred fought beside his brothers, shoulder to shoulder with Percy, with whom he had recently reconciled. The sight of the Weasley brothers reunited in the heat of battle spoke volumes. For all their past disagreements, they now stood together, defending the school that raised them, the values they cherished, and the people they loved. Fred's wand was ready, his heart unwavering. In that chaotic storm of spells and screams, Fred's final moments were spent doing what he had always done, fighting with courage and lifting others' spirits. As he joked with Percy during the battle, an explosion shattered the corridor. In a flash, Fred was gone. The boy who had filled rooms with laughter fell silent. "And that's the last time I'll ever hear him laugh," Ron would later remember, a line that haunts the heart of every reader who knew Fred as more than just a joker. His death sent shockwaves through the narrative, not only because of the loss, but because of what it represented. Even the brightest lights can be extinguished in war. Fred's death wasn't just a loss to the Weasley family. It was a loss to everyone who believed in the power of laughter, courage, and brotherhood. He died, not in vain, but as a warrior for good. His life wasn't long, but it was full of action, of meaning, of purpose. He chose his side early and never wavered. He stood for more than mischief. He stood for resistance. Even in death, Fred's spirit lingered in the sparks of rebellion, in the courage of those who continued the fight, and in the hearts of those who refused to be broken by darkness. George was never the same after losing his twin. Their bond was more than siblinghood. It was something close to symbiosis. Fred's absence created a silence no laughter could fill, but even in grief, George carried Fred's legacy. The shop remained open, the laughter continued, not as denial, but as tribute. Every joke became a reminder, every firework an echo of Fred's bravery. In choosing to go on, George became a living monument to the brother he lost. And through him, Fred continued to inspire. Fred's story is not told often enough with the reverence it deserves. In a tale filled with chosen ones and legendary battles, Fred Weasley reminds us that true heroism can be found in the margins, in the boy who turned a classroom into a battlefield of wit, who turned a joke into a sword, who died with courage in his chest and light in his eyes, his laughter, his loyalty, his unshakable resolve, all of it wove together to make him a hero of the highest order.